On behalf of Elements Theater Company, thank you all for joining us, and on behalf of the panel members, thank you, Nyack, for hosting us for this discussion. This is the first of 3 panel discussions. The subject of how the arts humanize our culture is obviously an enormous subject that we could talk about probably every day for the next year. So what we decided to do was to narrow it to character and empathy. So today our focus will be on building character and bringing empathy to the communities we're a part of through the arts. So I'm going to ask each of our panelists to talk about themselves and what they do and what their backgrounds are for a little bit, just to introduce and to give some context to who you're with this evening. Do you mind starting with this? Yes.
Hi everyone, my name is Mauricio Salgado, and I am the Director of Domestic Programs for artists striving to end poverty, which is quite the mandate. And our mission, our way of doing that, is by connecting artists like yourselves, of any age, with youth around the world, to foster critical thinking and awaken imagination. Now, I came to Artists Striving to End Poverty at the very beginning. When I was 5 years old, my parents would teach parenting classes and marriage therapy courses to farm workers who had recently migrated to this country. And they would do so through role play. Because preaching to them, as you were discussing, this aggressive teaching to passive audience wasn't getting the point across. So we would do these role plays where they would have me stand up and my mother would neglect me and my father would get upset, and then my mother would yell at my father and my father would hit my mother, and in turn my mother would hit me. At which point I would cry and the parents would laugh.
That's the way it should be in every family.
Right. Well, what's interesting is what happens the moment after, right? Because there is that acknowledgement that the parents had with that story. But right afterwards, we engage in a conversation where my parents turn to each other and they talk about, well, what is this about? Why did I do this to you? Why did you do this to me? And then, at the end, my mother turns to me and she goes, "And Mauricio, how did it feel when we hit you?" And I would be like, "It felt bad." That's simple. And the parents would wake up. They would all of a sudden notice me in the room. I wasn't just a two-dimensional person that was for the betterment of the use of the family, right? I actually had an experience. I had feelings. And the parents would in fact come to me after the class and would talk to me and would say, "Wow, I'm so impressed that you know how to speak, and wow, you feel, and wow, you care." And that was the beginning for me of this journey of using the arts, the power of the arts to communicate across a divide. The next experience flashed forward 13 years to being 18 years old and a freshman at Juilliard, and my second day of class is September 11, 2001. And all of a sudden, as an 18-year-old in New York City with this experience of, who am I? Why am I here? I grew up serving the community, and now I'm in an institution that's all about, as you were mentioning, this career-oriented, entertainment-oriented, one-track kind of profession. And what was interesting was what our professor said to us. They said, a serious amount of destruction just happened up there. Let's counter it with creation. Let's take the time to create it here, and let's care about how we create. And there began my journey to understand, how do I create to bridge that divide? The divide that I experienced as a young person, and then the divide that I felt here in New York City. And that continues to this day. And so that is where my work has led me to Artists Striving to End Poverty, and where I will continue to be expressing and sharing my art. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Larissa Gelman, and I am currently the Director of Educational Outreach at the 92nd Street Y. If you're not familiar with the 92nd Street Y, it's 100 140-year-old community and cultural center on 92nd and Lexington, where our mission as an organization is to obviously bring arts and culture to the community, but also to go beyond our constituency. And our constituency was 140 years ago. The organization was started by German Jews, immigrant German Jews, not to be confused with Eastern European Jews, which were not thought of as highly as German Jews. And since then, it's really transformed from a young men's organization, just like a YMCA, to one of the most important cultural community centers in the world. And our wishes for the future is that we would be a model one at that. So my role at the organization is to create arts programs for children in grades K to 12. And we dabble in almost everything, but the main focus of the department is music. We have a concert series that we run for children in grades K to 3, which is a world music concert series where children learn language, culture, history, geography, all through the lens of music, which is a wonderful way for children to be introduced into the arts. We also run a schools partnership program where we bring theater, chorus, musical theater, xylophone, saxophone, dance, early childhood dance education to over 8,000 children in New York City. In addition to that, we have a Poetry Center Schools project where we invite students, high school students from all over the city to come and meet these amazing poets that speak at the 92nd Street Live. We have a pizza party for them with the poet. They get to talk to the poet and learn about what inspires a poet. I always wonder that myself. So that's the organization. In addition to that, we have a tremendous push right now for social media, for social link-ups, for really important lectures. We have an amazing program called the Social Good Summit, which is our way of connecting communities together through social media to talk about what's going on in the United Nations and causes all over the world. We have another series called Nyack College, we really encourage civic dialogue about politics, about what's going on in Washington, and many other things that are currently in the news. And then every night, if you look on 92i.org, you will see something pretty extraordinary happening. I think we have Dick Van Dyke coming. We just had Al Gore. It's the gathering. Anybody that has a book coming out usually goes to Jon Stewart at about 3 o'clock. To take the show, and then they come to the Y in the evening. So, so it's pretty amazing. And my background is, I'm actually an immigrant. I was born in Russia, and when I was 6 years old, I came from St. Petersburg, Russia, which is, I would say, a pinnacle of culture and arts in Europe, to America, which is a wasteland. There's no culture and arts here. And on the plane over here they were showing Superman. And it was 1979, and then you can imagine, talk about flash forward, when Christopher Reeves fell off the horse. I mean, it's like Superman is dead, and what is my world all about? But growing up here, my parents always believed that art and culture, arts and science is actually the way that the Greeks originally taught it, were the most important things for me to learn. And I fell in love with music, fell in love with the bassoon, actually, and went to college to study biology and bassoon. So I have a double degree in biology and bassoon from Oberlin College, and then went on to Yale to get my master's in bassoon performance. And for the first part of my career, I really spent traveling the world, performing as a bassoonist, as a chamber musician, as a soloist. And only when I actually had my own kids did I realize that maybe I should get it, as my mother called it, a real job. And started working at the 92nd Street Y. The arts are, what I do with the arts is I try to save lives. We have so many children in this city that are living in unbelievable circumstances with no access to the arts. And I think what an organization like the Y does is we bridge that. We are at 92nd and Lexington. If we go 8 blocks north of where we are, it's a completely different world than 8 blocks south of where we are, where we have the highest concentration of the richest people in the world to some of the largest concentration of the poorest. And we are trying to make it okay for people to travel above 96th Street and below 96th Street. And you can imagine who those people are back and forth. And it's just so important for kids to understand that cultural organizations, museums, concert halls are open to them, are available to them, are not only for the rich and for the privileged. And I think that's what we're going to try to do. We do that every day. We're going to continue to do that as much as possible. In terms of the funding for the arts and the patronage of the arts, your professor is absolutely right. It was the church. The church was the patron of the arts. We rely very much these days on affluent people or affluent foundations to support us. And the more we know, the more that we can prove that the arts are so important to preserving, maintaining, treasuring our own culture, the more we can make the case that they should be funded. You guys will all have jobs. We can all go watch you. I can retire and I can see all you people sing opera or perform. So make sure that in your time in school, you capture as much as you can so that because you are going to be responsible for raising money for these programs in the future.
I'm Peter Felicia, and I've spent most of the last 25 years being a theater critic, or as I prefer to say, praiser. I mean, after all, when you think of a critic is such a negative word. If you brought a jewel into somebody to say whether it was good or bad, that person is called an appraiser. He might tell you it's good, he might tell you it's bad. Well, why don't we use that term for a critic? I wish we would. I go to about 300 to 350 shows a year. I've seen over 9,000 shows in my life, and I certainly have seen so many things happen as a result of seeing people act plays. I've seen so many lives change. That being from my friend Laura Hayden, who tells me that when she was a young punk on the streets of New York, smoking weed, hanging around, getting drunk, suddenly one day a truck rolled up and said, "We're putting on a play." It was Joseph Papp's Mobile Theater, and he was coming to the Bronx to put on a play. And she couldn't believe what she was seeing. It was a musical version of Two Gentlemen of Verona, the Shakespeare play, and it totally transformed her life. She now has a wonderful job at the Dodge Foundation, where she gives out money to theaters. So that's just one example. Have you ever noticed that whenever a kid goes into a high school and does something terrible with a gun, he's never a member of the drama club? You never hear that? It's true. It's true. A few years ago, somebody went into a school in Bellingham, Washington. 3 kids, actually. Shot up a lot of people. Suddenly somebody noticed they were dressed exactly like the characters in the movie Natural Born Killers. Now, have you ever heard of anybody going into a school, shooting up people dressed like Captain Von Trapp, Henry Higgins, Harold Hill? No, you haven't. The only guns our kids are interested in is anti-bitch gun, which is a show, ironically enough, where nobody shoots at anything beyond skeets that fly in the air. So I know that arts can change people. I've seen it happen so many times. I know I will continue seeing it again. And I know if you go to the theater, which tends to be a more optimistic and rarefied medium than TV and movies. We can all cite exceptions to the rules, yes indeed, but especially musical theater, put on a happy face, climb every mountain. You got to have a dream. If you don't have a dream, how are you going to have a dream come true? You got to have heart. All these messages are found in so many Broadway musicals, and they pack a wall of it. I think they really help people to become better people, and they get it. I remember when I was teaching high school, there was Jack Finlayson and Ann Miner, who used to be in front of my class every day, kissing and hugging and touching every part of each other's body and just going crazy with each other. And I got used to it. And one day I'm walking down the hall and I see Ann kissing and hugging and touching another boy entirely. I said, "Ann, what about Jack?" And she said, "Well, like the song says, I lost that love and feeling." You know, that song actually gave her permission to dump the boyfriend. The arts do influence people, even down to that
I want to just talk a little bit about who I am, and then we'll actually start with some questions, and then we hope to hear from you. I'm Sr Danielle Dwyer. I'm the Artistic Director of Elements Theater Company. We are a resident theater company on Cape Cod in Orleans, Massachusetts. We have been in existence for about 20 years. One of our main focuses of work is conversation and education. So this is a perfect arena for what we feel is really important. And as we work on plays, there is always a process of education for the actors as they learn to live another person's life and to find the truth of a character that may or may not be a part of their experience. So in that education process, there's an awful lot born in each one of us about what another person might feel, the choices another person might make, and also what we are able or not able to do. So it tends to be a very for lack of a better way of saying it, self-aware. Hopefully not self-centered or self-consumed, but self-aware. And in that process of our work, we like to share that with the audience. Hopefully the audience will see it through the play. And often there will be conversation about what the audience has seen. And that tends to be something that really thrills and ignites us, because a moment of community is born between the actor, the audience, the playwright, and something ignites, and there's possibility for more conversation and for bridges to be built. So, hence this discussion. How do the arts humanize our culture? So what I'd like to do is ask, we're going to have 3 questions. We're going to direct them to, specifically to start off, each one panelist, and all the panelists will jump in. And then we'll go to your questions. All right? In the dining room, we see a deficit of empathy, a lack of desire to understand another person's reality. We also see the pain of dishonest relationships and selfish attitudes. How do the arts cultivate empathy and build character, leading to a more humane society? Would you mind starting with that, please?
Yes. So I want to talk briefly, as we open the conversation with empathy, I want to take a moment to offer a definition for empathy. Because I think it is a term that is being used often, and it's being used on both sides, both as a negative word as well as a positive word, right? There is a researcher that speaks of empathy. The best definition I've heard so far is as genuine curiosity, okay? It is an experience of stepping into, of being curious about what someone else is going through without imposing judgment. Now, judgment is not to say that's not a bad thing. We do judge all the time, every day, every minute, to understand how to get to one place to the next. We go through a series of judgments. And that researcher offered that that's what sympathy is. That sympathy is an experience of understanding a situation based on your judgment of what that situation is, and deciding whether or not you agree or disagree or are willing to go down that path. But empathy is something completely different. It is a willingness to, as Rumi puts it, step beyond that field of right and wrong and encounter that person elsewhere. Okay? Empathy happens naturally. We are naturally empathic. If I were to get up right now and some of you might be having an experience or might feel with me, right? We naturally do that. Our bodies have a capacity for that. But there is a type of empathy that is learned, and that is this cognitive empathy. That is this idea that understanding the context. Not just the physical experience, but the context of someone's journey. Okay? That is a learned behavior. That curiosity demands a desire to learn something new. And most of us struggle learning new things. Having the desire to learn something new is above and beyond, is a skill that is practiced, that is honed. And what do the arts do? We create a space for discovering new things. Right? I'll give you a wonderful example of an empathic experience. Sufjan Stevens has a song. Okay? Sufjan Stevens is a folk singer. And he has a song called John Wayne Gacy, which is about the journey of the serial killer. John Wayne Gacy killed 27 people in Illinois in the 70s. And the last verse of this song says, "And in my best behavior, I'm really just like him. Look underneath the floorboards for the secrets I have hidden." Right? In that moment, Sufjan allows himself to step into that person's journey and go, you know what? Although maybe I haven't killed 27 people, I have made an impact in the journey of many others. That willingness to step in then all of a sudden humanizes that person as well as myself. I am capable of just as much, right? Behavior and action as the next person. And this I've seen firsthand in South Africa. We work in South Africa, in India, here in the States, in South Florida, connecting artists of all ages. And one of my experience was teaching a group of men I was leading a conversation about what it means to be a man. And this was after we had done a lot of theatrical play, which gave us the freedom, the safety to talk, to have a conversation. And in that conversation, we started talking about rape. And the fact that 1 in 4 South African women, 1 in 4, I would say even a third of the girls we worked with were victims of rape. From birth, right, to adulthood. And some of the men in our group were rapists. And they were teenagers. They were 18, they were 19 years old. I have a problem with that. I have a problem with that because I grew up in a world where rape was not allowed. My mother is a feminist. I have 2 aunts who were raped. That is a journey that is foreign to me, and I would never allow myself to associate with that. I, in fact, am willing to demonize, or at that point was willing to demonize, anyone who was a rapist. But in that moment, I had to give over because what I was interested in was this curiosity. What does that mean? What is that about? Why? And allow that person to be humanized, which created ultimately a space for forgiveness, okay, and a space for grace, which taught the both of us something incredibly important. I understand, I respect rape in a way that I would not have before. And as Sufjan Stephen points out, we're capable of anything. And I recognize that. Empathy in character, specifically as an actor, it is our skill, it is our craft to step into another character's shoes. I was talking to Sister Danielle about playing Buckingham in Richard III, and that is a character who's associated with great evil. And when I played that character, I was all of 22, and I had no idea of what I was capable of the evil that I was capable of. So for as skilled and proficient at Shakespeare as I may be, I am no good at Buckingham. Or so I was at that moment, and my teachers let me know as much. And I didn't understand why. I am a skilled actor. I get this. I trained at this institution. I should understand how to do this. I graduate from school, and I land no jobs. I'm horrible at auditioning, and I can't get why. And the following summer, after my year graduating, I go on the road. And I work in South Africa, I work in France, I work in Peru, I do all kinds of work. And in that experience, I return. And all of a sudden, I start landing work. And the first play that I land is playing a father, a husband, whose relationship isn't going so well. And I learned what that was on the road, because my marriage was 2 years deep at that point, and we were struggling too. So all of a sudden I had a depth of experience with which to play with, to be able to step into that character's journey. That there is something to be said about if I'm going to step into somebody's journey, there are technical ways of doing that. But if I really want to catch the profundity of it, I need to understand my own. I need to be willing to ask my own question about my own journey. At which point, conversation is possible, as Sister Danielle was talking about. And that is what empathy brings. It brings a space for conversation. I might not agree with rape, but I'm now willing to have a conversation, and potentially that person and I will come to terms, and rehabilitation is possible, not just for him, but for the victim as well. And I think South Africa is a wonderful example of this. You consider the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and what that was able to do, creating a space for dialogue, right? And I think the arts do that precisely. And as actors, as storytellers, we have an innate capacity for this. We step into people's stories. And if we can't, it's not a story worth watching.
not a story that we're interested in. So I begin the dialogue with that, with a definition of empathy and my own experiences and how I've seen the impact of that in the world.
It's very interesting to try to teach 5-year-old, 6-year-old children about empathy. And I think I read a research article the other day that those children that can grasp empathy, the sooner on in life they do that, the more successful they are in the world. And it's hard to tell why one child gets it and then another child doesn't. It's like the same thing. I tried to put my 3.5-year-old on skis the other day, and I see kids zipping, and they're doing great, and mine is falling. So we don't quite really understand. But one of the ways that we can try to do it is through the arts, obviously. And I'll give you an example of one way that we tried to do it last year through merging many different art forms together to tell an extremely compelling story that I don't think we could have told without the arts. The story was about 4 boys that were imprisoned in a concentration camp during World War II. The concentration camp was in Czechoslovakia, outside of Prague. It was called Theresienstadt, the German, or Terezin, which was the Czech name for the concentration camp. This was not just a concentration camp for children, it was for everyone, for all minorities or the unwanted, basically. So Slavs, Jews, Gypsies, anybody that was outside of the Aryan race, pretty much. But in it, what was interesting was that, forgive me for anybody that knows about Terezin, the story of Terezin, I'm just going to have to go into the background of it. It was really created as a showcase for the Nazis to show to the Red Cross that we're treating people okay. So it wasn't the worst of the worst, but it was still pretty bad. There were plenty of people that died there. It was a transition camp to Auschwitz and to other death camps. So here are these children that have been separated from their parents. And one boy in particular, whose name was Peter Gins. His father was Jewish, his mother was Catholic. So he was torn away from his parents and sent there, while his mother and father still lived in Prague. In the room were something like 25 boys that all lived together with a teacher. And that teacher inspired them to create a magazine every single week to talk about their feelings, to document what was going on through poetry, through literature, through art. And the teacher didn't tell them what to think. The teacher didn't tell them what to write. And they were allowed to do whatever they want. Obviously, it was not allowed. They were doing it incognito so that hopefully the Nazis would see it. But in there, this teacher gave them, I would say, the only freedom that they had to express themselves. And in it, so this magazine that was a culmination of several years that these boys wrote, was actually saved. It was buried under the floorboards of the concentration camp, and it was discovered later and brought back to Prague and is actually published. And it's called Vedem, V-E-D-E-M, which means in the lead. These boys really felt like they were leaders. By using the arts to tell a story, they were leaders for their own people. Amazing, considering that they were 12 and 13 years old. They were also extremely educated, and Prague at the time was the center, very much in Europe, of arts and culture. Very intelligent population of artists. We had to tell this story to 5, 6, 7, and 8-year-olds. That was amazingly challenging, considering we can't even talk about anything in the public schools these days, right? We made a connection. We tried to say that the only thing that really survives in culture, and very much in history, are the arts. You think of the great empires of the world, the Romans, the Greeks, the Egyptians. What do you think of when you think of these cultures? Anybody? Their sculptures, their paintings, what else?
The architecture.
Architecture. That's what survives from these giant, giant empires. So we wanted to show that to the children that they can leave a legacy behind, but they can also empathize with people that were much less disadvantaged than even the poorest children in the South Bronx. And that's a hard stretch because there's a lot of very difficult situations in the South Bronx and in Harlem and in other communities in New York. what we did was I wrote a script about 4 boys and different ways that they use the arts to tell their story. And the children came and they listened. And one child, and this, I know that if one child got something out of it, then it made a difference. She said, I want to know more about Peter Gibbs. And this was a black little girl from East Harlem. I think she was probably 7 years old. For her to want to know more about a dead Jewish boy was pretty amazing, and I think that was a shining effort of what empathy is. We asked the children in their classrooms, so this was in the concert hall, we asked the children in their classrooms to do a similar experiment to what one of the teachers in Terrazine did with their kids, which was draw what you see and draw what you dream. And so there are examples of paintings. They were teaching them how to paint in a concentration camp of what the children dreamed about. It was a little house floating away on a leaf. There were pastoral settings, little houses, you know, what children imagined childhood would be like, and then what they actually saw, which was pretty extraordinary. And so we asked the children in our schools, which was about 3,000 children, to do the same thing, and then we shot them up so that we were parallel with the children from Terrazine, so that we were trying to stress empathy more and more and more throughout the concert. So I'm going to end this and I'll round it out. Empathy for a minority that's been imprisoned can be taught in many different ways, and we've done it in our own culture. You know, if you think about the Japanese after World War II, we've done that. We did it to the American Indians. We've done it. It's systemic, it's chronic, it's going to happen over and over again in history. But it doesn't have to happen in your own culture or your own religion or your own race. There's ways to talk about it. Even to young children, I think if we do that from a very early age, hopefully those children will grow up to have a little bit more empathy for other people.
Well, a lot of thoughts come as a result of that. When 1999 turned into 2000, I was asked to write for my newspaper the 10 most significant plays of the last 100 years. And 2 immediately came to mind: The Diary of Anne Frank and A Raisin in the Sun. Both have a couple of things in common. Both take place in essentially one room. And in a way, people are trapped there. One literally, the Franks, who are trying to escape the Nazis by going into this attic in Amsterdam and hoping they're not going to be noticed. And in A Raisin in the Sun, the Younger family, that's their last name, Younger, is trapped economically. They can't get out of where they live. They can't afford any place better. Why are these significant? Well, when Diary of Anne Frank was produced on Broadway, it certainly was a sensation and won a Pulitzer Prize. But when it was done in Germany, where the Nazis, of course, were in power, and the reasons the Franks had to go into hiding, after the first performance, one of the authors told me this, there was no applause whatsoever. And the author said, boy, I guess they didn't like it. No, they did like it. They were ashamed of what had happened. And a play like this will keep something from that from happening again. In Raisin in the Sun, done on Broadway in 1959, believe me, many of the white people who went to see that show, when they walked into that theater, said, I do not want black people living next door to me. I do not want that. When they came out of that play 2.5 hours later, their minds had changed because they had been with these people. Now, there have been movies of The Diary of Anne Frank and Raisin in the Sun, and they're not shown that often. And yet those plays get continually revived. Why? Because when you're sitting in a room with these people, you feel like you're a part of them and their problems. You are a silent partner involved with them. And that's why theater is such a powerful medium. Empathy. I'll never forget a production I saw in a church. One of my former students said, oh, come see me in The Learned Ladies by Moliere. Okay. Of the 9,000 shows I've seen, I'd say it ranks around 4,500 1. You know, it was perfectly decent. When I got there, there were 11 people in the place, and the stage manager came out and said, would you all mind coming down and sitting in the first row? So we all did. Okay. So the play's going on, and there's Cléante and Elamir and all these French people. They're all these, the ladies with these beautiful gowns, and we're paying attention, and all that. when suddenly, out from the wings, zooms a water bug this big, and zooms onto the stage and suddenly stops. Wait a minute, I come by here every night, and nothing's going on, and suddenly there are lights on, there are people clumping around, and we're looking at this bug, we're wondering what's going to happen. And the bug takes a couple of steps, dares to take a couple of steps, and the bug is really doing a good job of avoiding the actors. And suddenly, we're much more interested in the bug than we are in the play. And we're watching. And I'm telling you, at one point, an actor almost stepped on the bug. We all went, ooh! You know, the actors do not see the bug. They don't know why we're reacting this way. And I'm telling you, that when that bug made it across the stage and went off into the wings, we suddenly applauded. We had to. That's what we could possibly do. Because indeed, we were so interested in this bug's fate. We had sympathy for the bug, we also had empathy, because we have been in that bug's position in one way or another. And we have felt that there are people who would destroy us at a moment, for that matter. So, as a result, to be able to feel something for a bug that if we were in our house, we'd stomp on it with no mercy. It's very interesting how we had such feeling when we saw this bug on stage in very different set of circumstances.
I think I'm going to pass on commenting on this and move on to the next. I can't compete with the water bug. Okay, this is for you to start off with you, Peter. Social norms in the art of conversation have changed tremendously in the past 30 years. We text rather than talk, email instead of write, and rely on social media to influence the art and entertainment scene. How do you respond to these changes in culture to preserve what is important while finding new entry points into the arts?
A lot of people complain about the fact that we now have so-called amateur critics writing on blogs, telling what their opinions are of shows. I welcome it. I think it's great. I think we need more interaction from the common man. Yeah, the critics are really terrible human beings. You don't know that unless you really hang around with them, and I do. You know, I mean, most of them, well, we're all failures, you know, because all of us wanted to do something else, and when we couldn't, we fell into criticism because that was our way of hanging on to the arts. So we have no talent whatsoever. So as a result, because we have that agenda, we can be mean to other people who are actually trying to do it. That's what we do so many times. I don't really ascribe to that. I can't tell you how many times I've given good reviews to plays I have hated because I knew there was an audience for them. What I want to do is be a theatrical matchmaker. When I see a play, it has nothing to do with whether or not I like it. It has to do with whether or not I think there's an audience for it. Ooh, this play I saw about single people back in 1994 that I thought was so stupid. Well, the audience loved it. I kept on writing in the review. The audience loved it so much. Today, they have whiplash collars on because they were throwing their heads back so much from laughing. The artistic director called me up the next day and said, "You didn't like it, did you?" I said, "No, I hated it like poison." He said, "But you gave us that good review." I said, "Yeah, because I know people will like it." That show ran 12 years off Broadway. I Love You, You're Perfect, Now Change. Not for me, but for a lot of other people. And this is what the common man can do in reviewing. He can certainly let his fellow common men know what's going on. For example, I was reading a review at Christmas time about the musical A Christmas Story, which was on Broadway at the L'Enfantine Theater. Not long before that, the musical Elf, which is also a Christmas story, had opened. And of course, when you're a theater critic, you see A Christmas Carol an awful lot in December. Okay, so the critic thought it would be clever to do something where he says, "Dear Santa, could we please have a moratorium on all these Christmas shows? There are just too many of them." Yeah, there are too many for you because you get invited to everything and have to see everything and write about it. But the League of American Theater says that a heavy theater goer, one who goes all the time, goes 4 times a year to Broadway. At those prices, of course, who can afford to go more than that? You know, so why is he writing about his own problems in seeing Christmas shows? Believe me, the other people did not see Christmas shows as much as he did. Maybe they scraped their pennies together and went to one. So how is that review relevant to anybody? So I say yes, bring on the amateur critics. I think it's really great to hear everybody's opinion. There's room for everybody out there because so many of us who are critics are so jaded from seeing everything. So many critics say, "Oh, there's nothing new there." Yes, because we've seen so many other plays. The average person hasn't. Let's give some consideration to him when we're reviewing.
I love the social Facebook and the YouTube and everything that's going on. I'm a musician, so a different mode of delivering my art form is terrific. There's, I'll give you an example, there's a pianist from the Ukraine, I believe, and I'm going to mess up her name, but her name is Valentina I believe. Anyway, she had 50 million YouTube hits. She had never had her own concert in a concert hall. She never played Carnegie Hall, never played in any concert hall in Europe. But she was talented. She created her own shtick, I guess I would say. She was attractive. She put it out on YouTube. She got all these, and now she's touring all over the world performing concerts, and she's coming to the 92nd Street one next year. I think this gives everybody. There's a lot of cat videos. I agree. We don't need another cat video. But what we do is, if you have talent or if you have something to share, put it out there, because it's just enriching. The arts. And the more people that get involved and the more entry points into the arts, the better. If you could train your cat to do it, that would be great. But I think we need to embrace it. It's definitely not going away. It's definitely a distraction for many kids. So if you can, if you have little brothers and sisters, you can keep them off the games and everything, definitely, and read a book. But I think if you can use it to your advantage for your own marketing, so you don't need a manager, you don't need an agent anymore. You can really be your own entrepreneur. So I think it's great.
And I just briefly want to touch on, I have learned so much. I, for example, watched an artist, a Syrian artist, do an entire 13 webisode series on being underground in puppets and talking from his perspective about all of the players in the Syrian revolution through puppets. Like, talk about learning other experiences through the internet, through this network, through this open field. And I think that although, yes, certain formalities are being challenged, new ones are being created, right? We are in the middle of discovering what our new means, what one style of communication is going to be. And I think it's very exciting if we challenge ourselves to say, well, what are the norms that we need to establish in order to make this an effective way of communicating? As I was telling Sister Danielle, my kids in South Africa, they text, right? Everything is about SMS, and it's all about being as efficient with words as possible. So they abbreviate everything. They take out vowels out of everything. It's very difficult to read, but their language is heightened. Like, they only pick the important words. So rather than rambling on, like I do often, they know what they want to say, and they're careful about what they say to each other, precisely because that medium has forced them into that. So I'm excited to see what's going to come out of it as we continue to communicate and reach out and beg for others to hear our stories, especially currently with all of the relevant issues that are taking place.
Okay, our last question, and we'll go to you all, because we're running out of time, is emotional isolation is a theme in the play, Dynamere, and a prevalent issue in our society, especially among young people. How do the arts provide another language for communication? How do the arts create community? That's to you, Marissa.
Well, I think all the art disciplines, music, dance, theater, visual art, poetry, it's another language. We're learning, either it's musical notation or script or dialogue, whatever it is, it's another language. When we go into schools, it's just a cultural change when we bring an arts program into the schools. And kids want to be part of something big, they want to be part of something good, they feel pride in their school and what they can accomplish. The arts do that and more. They humanize us, they enlighten us, enrich us, empower us. That's one of our major things that we want to do. And I don't know any child in a dance room or in a theater class or in a chorus that feels isolated. So I think the shootings are because of that isolation. And like you said, there's no lead Peter Pan ever went around shooting. We have to do more. We have to keep pushing the arts in. And you guys have to be advocates advocates for it, and it's now. Don't wait till tomorrow. Don't wait till you're older. Don't wait till you have a job. Don't wait until you're disgruntled. Do it now. I think if you, I have to preach for a moment, but you've seen. If you read the papers, you've seen so many symphony orchestras that are on strike or going bankrupt, and the culture when I was in the conservatory and at Juilliard and all the good conservatories, there was no outreach, there was no communication to our audience. There was an invisible wall between the stage and the audience. And even musicians today that have been in the orchestra for 20, 30 years feel like, well, my job is to play principal oboe, and I do that really well, and that's what I'm going to do. And my argument is, yes, you're the last generation that's going to be able to do that. There's something we call the 21st century musician, which you have to teach, you have to write, you have to perform, and you have to be good at all of those things in order for the arts to survive. So, and they just do so much good.
Want to flip a coin? When I first discovered this marvelous thing called theater when I was 15 years old, I started getting into every book I could in the library and going to every movie of every stage property. And one that had just opened at that time was Flower Drum Song, a Rodgers and Hammerstein musical, and I went to see it, and I sat in the first row, as I always do when I go to the movies. And shortly after the movie began, I heard two people sit behind me. And I noticed during the movie that every time I was laughing at something that was funny in the picture, the moment I started laughing, they happened to be laughing at the exact same moment, and they stopped at the exact same moment. So I didn't know what they were or anything, but we were having such a good time. And when the movie ended, I turned around to share the experience with them, and that's when I was surprised to see that they were black people. Now, here's the thing. I grew up in a completely lily-white community. I hate using the term lily because that's the name of my ex-wife, but that's another story. So, I didn't know any black people. And while our teachers had always said to me, everybody's the same, I'm not even sure they believed it, but they wanted us to believe it. But that's the day that I believed it. And you know what's also interesting? Flower Drum Song is about Asians. So here we were, black, white, listening to the problems of Asians and how they solved them, what they learned during the course of the show, that being too traditional is no good, being too liberal is no good, you gotta find a middle ground. We learned a lot that day. I was writing a book once about baseball, and I was up at Cooperstown Hall of Fame. I was coming back, and I saw a big sign in Albany saying, "The Wiz, tonight, free, Washington Square Park." Wow, it was 8:15. Hey, why not see The Wiz? I pull up, I walk in, the place is pretty packed. It's an outdoor theater, but there is one seat in the front row that's completely empty. And I thought, oh great, there again, I'd like to sit in the front row. I sit there, and I noticed to the left of me are a whole group of senior citizens, elderly people, half asleep, taken as a group, we're going to do something tonight type thing. They're all asleep, they're not. To the right of me is a young black couple, and both husband and wife, they have a stroller in front of them with a kid, hands crossed, and they're not speaking to each other. And I know what happened. She said to him, I want to go see this play. We're not going. Come on, we're going. It's free. I'm not going. I'm not going to no play. You are going. So by the time they got there, they weren't speaking to each other. They were furious with each other. Okay, so the show starts, and the woman next to me wakes up, and she hasn't thought about The Wizard of Oz since 1939. And it's all coming back to her. She's going, oh, the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and she's having a really good time. Meanwhile, the black guy thought he was going to hear because, ding dong, which is dead. And The Wiz is certainly black-tinged music. It was written by a black man, and it certainly has a soul feeling. And there he's saying, this is all right. And now the wife is more furious with him because he didn't want to come. Now he's having a good time. Really her good time. All right. Now there are some people, and you might even be this type of person, it's perfectly fine if you are, I'm not making a judgment, but when they enjoy a joke at the theater or a movie, they turn to the person next to them and acknowledge, you've seen it happen, you might even do it, fine. All right. So anyway, the white woman is looking to me, and I'm not laughing because I don't find it as funny at all. All right. And the black guy is laughing, and he can't turn to his wife. He can't admit that she was right. This was a good idea. So suddenly they connect to each other, and I'm looking, and in front of me, they're leaning in, old white female, young, black, male, laughing at jokes, sharing it. If those two people were walking down the street, they would assume they have nothing in common with each other. And yet, this experience brought them together. Art can do this. Art can do this. Art is one of the few things that can do this. Art should do this, but it will only do it if indeed we have enough of it. And we do need more of it.
So we actually just have about 5 minutes left, but could we have questions?
I have one quick, well, it's not that quick, but from these panelists, my wife and I traveled to Moscow quite a lot, and in 1990, we went to a hospital where only terminally ill children were sent. And we went there, and we heard that 60% of them were cured. We said, something's weird here. And it was the arts. And I want to know whether any of you have experienced the miraculous in arts. A woman who was a painter taught these young children, 5, 7, 10 years old, how to paint. In the actual act of painting and doing all this, something happened within them, and their cancer disappeared. We have some of their books that they published. It is one of the most amazing stories of healing I've ever seen. But it was the arts that did it. Have any of you experienced things like that?
I just have to, since I was born in that country, I hope it wasn't the untrue propaganda of the...
Oh, no. This was the Father Men Hospital near Cosmos-Sylvanian Church. It's a very real place.
God bless them. I have a hard time believing that. I've heard lots of those.
We visited 8 times over a course of 10 years. It's true.
That's amazing.
I have no problem believing it. I believe it totally because I really do believe that Norman Cousins did a book some years ago about the fact that he got cancer. He went out and got every Marx Brothers movie he could find, every funny picture he could find. He was convinced that he could definitely laugh his way out of this situation. It's a little more complicated than I'm making it sound, but I really do believe that cancer is such a funky illness that we don't have any of the real answers to it, that after all these years we've made progress, but we haven't cured it, that I'm willing to easily believe that the arts can help us.
Have you had an opportunity to use interactive performance, and how do you find it?
That's all we do is interactive, because we feel like if you can create it yourself, if you can make it yourself, it has so much more potency to it. I just want to go back to your point about the arts healing. I've seen amazing things with Alzheimer's patients, and music in particular, and the long-term memory, how you can kind of instigate some kind, a person actually comes back to life, but not literally, but they are lost in their disease, and if you hear a familiar song from their childhood, you can actually see a glimpse of that person come back. So there's something about the arts that there's 3 parts of our minds really that contain memory. There's a working memory, which is just I'm sitting here holding the microphone. There's short-term memory, which is okay, I had a salad for lunch. And then there's a long-term memory. And if we can, when you activate the long-term memory with the arts, it has unbelievable potency.
Yeah.
And I would say that I saw it firsthand. A student of mine, we work with here in New York with an organization that provides housing for kids who have HIV as well as other cognitive and physical disabilities. And there was one boy in particular who had a cognitive disability that wouldn't let him retain information, so he had to remain, he is going to remain, or at least according to this institution, institutionalized for the rest of his life, because someone has to provide him with his meds. So when we started doing this process and he had to memorize his lines, one of the first things they told us was don't expect anything from him, because he's not going to pick it up. And of course he did. Right? He memorized his lines, and he continued remembering the lines and remembering the journey post our departure. In a very small in scale. I also know that I have seen how the arts can heal a mother so she doesn't beat her kids, right? And that is as miraculous.
Oh yeah.
Right? To see a mother who tells her kids, when mommy's singing, leave mommy alone because mommy's processing, right? That is her way of dealing with her stress and her tension so that she can be the mother she needs to be under really intense circumstances. So, yeah.
Well, there's another way, too, of looking at this as well in terms of the power of the arts. And to be fair, some prisoner was asked to confess, and they put a top volume over and over again. The song Itsy Bitsy Teeny Weeny Yellow Polka Dot Bikini to drive the person
They
crazy.
did that at Tosca in Russia outside the, I know.
Sure. So, I mean, but that, again, shows the power of the arts. It doesn't do it as well as curing people, but also it does indicate the power. Because if indeed there were no power in the arts, how come when dictators come over, the first thing they do is close down the books? They make sure that certain things are not read. Why is that? If it has no power, if it's just a story, what's the problem?
Just to go back to what you were saying, Dana, we did Pilgrim's Progress, the opera, about 6 years ago, and there was a woman who had cancer, and so she wanted to audition, but didn't feel she could because of being ill. So she came back to me and said, could I please audition, because I think my life depends on it. Well, she went into remission after being in the opera. What made that happen, I don't know. But I think her perseverance and her desire and her commitment to the opera.
There must be thousands of those examples somewhere.
I think so. Let's just do one more question.
All right. So
Sorry.
my question is, all right. So how have you seen the arts in the schools?
The question is, how do we see the arts in the schools?
Yeah, in the public schools.
I'll never forget going to see a production of A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum in Concord, Massachusetts at a high school, where the place was so packed, everybody wanted to see the show, that they had to add an extra row of seats. So in other words, if the last seat ended here, they added chairs here. All right, that's important to the story. There was a point where the director thought it would be fun to have a kid, the kid was playing the lead, come into the audience and pick somebody and bring him on stage. So the kid was trained to do this, and he came down that night, and he's ready to pick the kid, and suddenly he notices the kid is in a wheelchair. It was one of the most amazing things I've ever seen anybody do at a moment like this. This kid is many years later still a professional actor, and I'm not surprised given what I saw. He immediately went to reach and suddenly went eeny, meeny, miny, mo to the person behind him and picked the kid behind him and took him up to the stage, and therefore eliminated making the kid in the wheelchair feel any more embarrassment than he had to. I think he really saved the situation tremendously well. If something like this can happen in the school, we need more of it in the school. Of course, many arts programs are cut because the football team needs new decals for its helmets this year, and first things first. Because indeed, sports, even on the high school level, are big business. And the thing is, we can't compete in that way. And we have to fight for everything that we get in schools. Everything, because they're not listening to us. And the problem is, as I say, we have the answers. If they'd only listen to us and see that we can make better people out of people because of things like sympathy and empathy that comes from watching plays and musicals, we'd be much better off.
And how do we bring the arts back to the schools?
That's a huge question.
One of the things the Y is involved in is a national assessment of the arts, and as much as I hate that we have actually created rubrics on how we assess students in the arts, it's a way of telling the story. It's a very compelling way by showing scores, by showing achievement that the arts are important to student learning, to student progress, to everything. So that's one way that we're doing it. The Y is handling the dance thread of this national achievement that we received a grant from the national government, it's called the I3 grant. Carnegie Hall is doing music, Cooper Hewitt is doing art and design, and then I'm missing one, of course, which is music, dance, theater, oh I forgot who theater is. I'm so sorry, because I know you're all theater. But that's one way that we can do that. The other thing that I see every time that I go into the schools is that our classroom teachers have no knowledge of the arts at all. None. So for me, my most important kind of mission when I go into the schools is actually not to teach the students, but to teach the teachers. So.
Yeah, and I would add that there's an article in the Washington Post that came out last week talking about the state of the arts in schools, talking about the pendulum swinging in the other direction, talking about, yes, states might still be cutting funds, but institutions are putting more money in. In particular, philharmonics are putting more money into their budgets for arts programming. And the argument being, whether it's because they're trying to train more people to be their audience for the future so they can continue to get paid, or because they believe in the capacity, the transformative power of the arts, either way, there's more involvement, and they're seeing it in key areas across the country. That numbers are beginning to shift, and I think it has to do with that, with institutions starting to take up the call, right? Julia, I agree with you. I started there when there was no interest in the arts. In outreach. They were not a school that was oriented towards outreach, although their president is very oriented to outreach.
They are now.
They are incredibly, all the more. And I would
the student player is the president.
Oh, I know. Dr. Polisi, he cares deeply about what it means to be an artist, a citizen. And I would put that, I know a lot of artists who volunteer, young people who volunteer their time and start after school programs, who walk into schools and go, you know what, I have a certain amount of information, I'm going to spend some time with some students. And then teachers get curious, what is my student doing after school? And how come my student is partaking better in class? You know, is paying attention a little more. So how do we start using our time to get proactive and start knocking on doors rather than waiting for the right thing to open that door for
I
us?
just have to add one thing. So when I was growing up, which wasn't that long ago, every family whenever I went for a play date, had a piano in their living room. I don't know any families that have a piano in their living room.
We have 3.
You're not the new generation.
Similarly speaking, even though I came down hard with sports a moment ago, and I like sports quite a bit, the fact remains that there is something that they have that we are starting to adopt, and that's competition. I was recently at the Junior Theater Festival in Atlanta. I had gone last year, and I went this year. Last year, 64 schools competed. This year, 82 schools competed. So it's growing. What they do is they put on 15-minute excerpts from the musicals either they did in the fall or will do in the spring. And awards are given out. And awards are given out to the teachers, too, which is really nice. The teachers get to come to New York and spend a week here and learn from professionals how to become better teachers and do better shows, while the kids come home with trophies and so on and so forth. And that really helps because schools love to publicize any type of achievement. And winning, hey, it means something whether we like it or not.
Do we have, Sue, do you think we have time for one more question? Sure. The only thing that I would add to what's been said is that we can't give up and that we need to all keep doing what we're doing as far as bringing the arts back to the schools. One of the two of you.
I just have a question for Larissa. My question is, how did you get to that point where you decided that you were going to work for the Y and do all those programs when you had studied biology and Discussuion? I feel like it's so different. How did you get to that point?
It was. It's amazing. I had a baby, and my mother, the pressure from my mother to get a real job was overwhelming. As a matter of fact, we just hired this amazing singer from Broadway to do a show for the kids. Her name is Rosina Hill Jackson, and she said what did she say? Oh, she said her friend had a baby, and she said, Rosina, I'd really love for you to be the godmother, but you don't have a real job, So I think that so I had a job beforehand, which was performing, and I really thought that I was going to end up in a symphony orchestra somewhere, playing second bassoon in a good symphony orchestra, and I was going to be fulfilled. And the fact of the matter was that I didn't feel fulfilled when I was doing that. I wanted to do more. I wanted to use my brain and my talent in almost a more creative way than just sitting in a symphony orchestra playing the second bassoon part. So I looked for opportunities, and I didn't say no to anything. I tried the gigs that didn't pay very well. I tried my skill at writing, grant writing, at being a little bit of an entrepreneur and having a wood room attend and going on the road and making publicity material. So I was curious. the curiosity, the empathy. That I wasn't so empathetic as I was just curious about what is it else that I can do. So I would say you're studying, you're getting a degree that might not have anything to do with what you're going to pursue in your life, but what you're in school for is to learn how to learn.
Amen.
Right? And so the more you can do that and open up your mind to many different things, the more skills that you have, the more employers are going to look at you. And I have a lot of, also think about what you don't have on your resume, all those wonderful things that you do that are not on your resume, like you're a super skateboarder, or you're this, or you're that. So they all come into play, they all kind of converge on each other. I'll give you a great example. I have a degree in biology. I never thought I would use it again. Right now, there's this giant buzz, the national buzz about STEM programming, science, technology, engineering, and math. And my organization wants to jump on the bandwagon and create a STEM center. So the cool thing about it is that we know absolutely that in terms of technology, in terms of engineering, and even science, when you infuse creativity and the arts into that, it becomes like a super cool thing. I mean, if you think about photography, if you think of, there's a brand new museum that just opened up called the Museum of Math.
So now they want you to run it over.
They want me running the science programs.
That's so awesome.
So what I suggest is I'm not going to just do science programs, I'll do STEAM programs, which is an idea that's being fueled by the Rhode Island School of Design, which is arts and design into STEM. You never know. But the more skills that you guys can pick up along the way, the better you are in terms of employment. And what I do every day is the most creative thing. I mean, I'm creating curriculum for students. I get to talk to you guys. I get to educate. I get to talk to really cool people. And it's just every single day I'm learning, and it's great as long as you're open to it.
Well, I think we're going to have to call it for the evening. Obviously, this is a huge discussion, and we have lots more to talk about. So we encourage you to keep the discussion going amongst yourselves. And thank you, Maurizio, Larissa, and Peter for being part of this panel. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you.